So, in this lesson, you're going to learn about 4 ways of responding to social issues or problems that you notice in your school or your community. For each of us, there are going to be different issues that make us angry or frustrated or sad. And the question I want to ask today is, what do we do about that? So, when we notice a problem or an issue in our school or community that makes us frustrated or makes us angry or makes us sad, how do we respond? What do we do? So, I want to use 2 different social issues today. The first, I want you to imagine that you begin to notice that students are throwing away an excessive amount of uneaten food in the cafeteria, whether that's milk cartons that they haven't drank. Maybe that is whole granola bars or uneaten fruits and vegetables. But this is food that could be eaten by someone else that needs it. The second issue that I want to look at is one that has been coming up a lot in the media recently. Is there are schools around our country, not in Washington, but there are schools around our country that have dress code policies that unfairly target students of color. So in particular, there are several schools that have dress code policies banning hairstyles like weaves or braids, which you can imagine unfairly target our African American students. So these are 2 issues that we're going to look at. How would we respond to these issues if this was what made us angry or frustrated or sad, if we wanted to do something about it? So today you're going to take notes on these 4 different ways, and I would love for you to open to the next blank page in your composition notebook. You're going to title this Ways to Respond. On one side of this T chart, you're going to write definition, and on the other side, you're going to write example. So as I talk about these 4 different ways of responding, I'm going to ask for you to write the definition down in that definition column, and then next to it, you can just write an example. You don't have to write out the full example that I give, but just write some notes for yourself so you remember what are some examples of this way of responding. So let's get started. The first way of responding is leadership. Leadership is the act of planning, organizing, and leading a group of people in accomplishing a goal. I like to think of this as using my tools. I'm using my tools to really effectively plan, organize, and lead a group of people in really meeting an accomplishable goal. So let's look at our 2 different problems, and we'll look at some examples of what leadership might look like in responding to these problems. So an example of leadership in responding to the problem of uneaten food being thrown away. As a leader, I might organize a club that works to get donation bins next to trash cans, and organize a campaign that could be like maybe I create a video campaign, I put an advertisement through like a school newspaper, we put up posters reminding students to donate unused food. So I'm actually leading a small group of students to do something in response to this problem. So that's an example of leadership. If we think about the unfair dress code, an example of leadership might be working with administration to start a student-led committee that is rethinking the dress code policies and who they hurt. So I'm actually working on leading a group that is actually reframing that policy. So what I would love for you to do right now is I would love for you to go back to your notes and actually make sure that you've written down the definition of leadership, as well as just some short examples of what that might look like. So take a moment to do that now if you haven't done that already. So the second way of responding is activism. So you probably have heard a lot about student activists recently. So activism is taking direct action to create social, economic, or political change. This is using your feet. So if we think about our problem around uneaten food, an example of activism might be that I go before the school board and I give a speech explaining how much food is wasted every day and ask them to create community partnerships with organizations that could use uneaten food. What's important about activism is that I am not only stepping out and advocating or asking for some sort of change, but I'm really making sure that I'm seeing something happen because of that. So I'm asking the school board to actually create community partnerships where we can donate our unused food. An example of activism for our racist dress code policies, you can probably imagine, is organizing a school walkout in protest of racist dress code policies. So I am protesting at that point, or I'm organizing a student-led protest or walkout. So that's a great example of activism. I'm addressing that problem head on. I'm using my feet. Take a moment to write down that definition and some examples. Advocacy is using your voice. So advocacy, actually, if we look at the word advocacy, VOC is a root, and VOC actually means voice. So advocacy is using your voice for to be a voice for a harmed group or cause. So you are being the voice for someone who is voiceless, who can't speak for themselves. So if we look at our example of uneaten food, an example of advocacy would be to create a video raising awareness about how many people go unfed every single day in Seattle. You are being the voice for those who are hungry in Seattle and need food like the stuff that is being thrown away carelessly by your peers. If we look at our racist dress code policies, as a voice for those that are harmed, we could write letters to administration about how dress code policies unfairly target and harm students of color. So I want you to notice that when I'm being an activist, right, I am actually like advocating for change to happen. So I'm working on actually changing the dress code policy. If I am an advocate, if I'm using advocacy as my way of responding, I'm just talking about who is directly harmed by that. And I might be raising awareness, or I might be speaking directly to the people that can affect change, but I'm just talking about who's harmed. And then last is service. So service is the act of actually doing the work to serve others. I'm using my hands to actually do the work. So an example of service here is pretty easy. I am organizing maybe a group of students to collect uneaten food, and I'm actually taking it to a local food bank. I am doing the work, right? I'm using my hands to do some service for others. This example, the racist dress code policy, is a little bit more challenging to think of for service, but an example of this might be maybe I am working with some nonprofits or some community organizations that are working to support families or communities of color. So I know that this impacts communities of color. I know this impacts students of color. And so maybe I'm going out and I'm serving in organizations that are doing good work with communities of color. However, that's not necessarily a direct response to this issue, but there's not quite a great service example for this. So what I would love for you to do right now, you're welcome to go back and to look at any of the definitions that you missed, but make sure that you have a definition for each of those 4 ways of responding, as well as several examples that you can use today as you're thinking about ways that you can respond to the issue that you've been researching over the last couple weeks. After you've taken these notes today, what I want you to do is I want for you to take the paper assignment that the sub will pass out to you, and I want for you to begin to think about what are the ways that you and your group members can respond. Are you responding through leadership? Are you responding through activism? Are you responding through advocacy? or service in response to the issue that you have spent the last several weeks researching around systemic racism. Get started.